So these purses here are actually from the collection here at Behringer-Crawford. And I thought since we had Robert here that we'd ask him a little bit. Most of these are probably 30s, 40s. There might be one that's from the 1920s, but there are different techniques of beading. So Robert, can you explain what the different techniques of beading on these beaded purses that we see here is?
Yes, certainly. I think we've got at least two distinctly different, or possibly three distinctly different techniques. The three at the top and the three at the bottom are stitched on needle and thread. And if you get in really close, you can see that, like in that white one right there, that there's the background beads are making undulating patterns of lines. So they were not done on a grid. They were not done, so you can tell that they were stitched in place and in line to give a little bit of a background movement. Now, if you look at the bead purse directly above it with the couple, you can see that those beads are all perfectly lined up, like they were stacked one on top of another. It's almost like pixelations in a computer screen, that every bead is a little pixel. And they were either done as a bead weaving technique or as knitted. I'm thinking that is probably more of a bead weaving than knitted, because that would be a very, very, very complex pattern to set up for bead knitting. Now, this particular purse, I think, was bead knitted, which means you have to thread the beads on your knitting thread, all of them for the whole purse, and then you start knitting, and with each stitch you push a bead up. So you have to make sure that you have your beads properly aligned on the thread. This purse here, I'm thinking also was probably bead weaving, because again, everything is very precise in terms of its lining up of the designs. So you can sometimes just kind of look carefully at how the beads are applied to decide, was it done by a needle and thread? Was it done by bead weaving? Or was it done by bead knitting? And all of those were very popular techniques, particularly the bead weaving techniques, because they could follow charted designs for needlepoint, because it's all, one little square represents a stitch and a color, so you just take that color and make that color of the bead and do the weave it accordingly, one row at a time, and then you eventually create the design and the pattern. I don't think any of those were done by tambour work because of the nature of the fabric that they're on. I don't see any indication of sheer fabric, so it's unlikely that they were done with the tambour method, but rather the much more time-consuming bead weaving, bead knitting, or surface stitching.
Okay.
They're still gorgeous, regardless. They are
spectacular.
Nice little collection.
Yeah.
Particularly because you've got three very distinct techniques.
So Bob, can you explain this beautiful dress here and really what you did to it and why it's here, because it's also spectacular?
Well, it was a rescue of a dress that was owned by Kennedy Sabuwal, who was the 2015 Kentucky Outstanding Teen, and she was just 15 years old, and it was an off-the-rack dress that had the bodice covered in plastic stones, and it just was not attractive. And so I took the dress and repatterned the bodice so that I could do a beaded design on it, because I couldn't work on a finished garment. I had to do it on a flat frame. So that was one method of doing that. And then, so then I used a layer of tulle, and I used a layer of organza to support the tulle, so that it covered the markings from where the plastic stones had been stitched and or glued onto the bodice. So it's a combination of standing bugle beads, rhinestone cup chain, pearls, stones, Swarovski stones. Let's see what else is on there. Some thread stitching, in obviously a very fluid arabesque type of design. And it was done in pieces and then all sewn together and then basically slip covered onto the top of the bodice. So the whole thing could come off if needed. And she wore that to the 2016 Miss Kentucky Gala, and just looked fabulous in it.
So you made these tiaras as well?
Well, yes, I was teaching a class in Brooklyn with part of a tutu school, and there was a lady there working on making a wire-based tiara, and I was looking at it thinking, oh, that's really not attractive, and it was very clunky. So I put my head to work while my students were working, and I had some materials, so I took my wire, laid it out, took a pattern, and decided I'm going to see if I can do this on the tambour frame and wire it so that it stays upright and is bendable, but it also stores flat, which most wire tiaras don't. They're a solid structure. So it's just the same technique, and it's just that you cut away all the excess organza, and the wire is around the edges and around the main part of the design, so that helps to hold it in place. So I did 3 or 4 different styles of those just to see how it would work. So these are 2 more of the practice tiaras that I made. And again, they're all wired, mostly with sequins and beads and rhinestone cup chain. But they are wired, and we've suspended them here so that people could actually put them on and take a picture, because everybody needs a tiara. And if I turn this one around a little bit, you can just barely see the wires underneath the pearls along the edge, and it's all of the loops are all wired together. And that's the first thing that goes on the frame, and then you bead over it. And then we added these other wires to keep them sturdy while they were hanging. But they will store flat. They will also be able to, because this little red one here was shipped to me in Minneapolis because I forgot it at home, and it was all folded up in a box. And I opened it up and flattened it out, and sure enough, it all came right back. So this was an experiment to see how this technique would work for potential ballet companies, because it's much more efficient to store, a corps de ballet of 30 or 24 or 30 dancers to store all their tiaras in a flat box and not in a whole series of boxes for storage.
So Bob, you worked with Miss Kentucky in the Miss Kentucky pageant, right?
I've done some things for the Miss Kentuckys, yes.
So are these wonderful boots, shoes here, what is the story behind these?
Well, when Miss America went back to Atlantic City in 2000, a few years ago, they went back to having the Show Us Your Shoes parade, where the contestants are paraded down the boardwalk on backs of convertibles, and the audience, so the bystanders, all show us your shoes, and they pick up their feet to show decorated shoes. So this particular year, Clark Davis, her dad was a UK basketball player, so she decided that she wanted to wear a basketball uniform in the parade, and we needed to have something on her feet, and so we decided on these high-top sneakers. Which was pretty much standard basketball, I think, attire when her dad was a player. So, I got the sneakers and I looked at them and figured, okay, it's got to be blue and white. There was no way of getting around it. So I decided I used an iridescent sequin to do the backgrounds, and then on each side of the outer side of each leg, when she picked her foot up, I wanted it to be able to read Kentucky, which, if you think about it, you've got a left outside and a right outside, and when you lift up one leg, you've got to make sure the letters are going in the proper direction to be read on that leg, and then in the opposite direction on the other leg. And that really stymied me for a long time, making sure that I had that correct, because I didn't want to do it and then have it all wrong after I finished the piece. And then on the inside of the legs, you'll see a music staff. And that is the first measure of her talent song, which was sung a cappella, and it is the opening to Summertime from Porgy and Bess. So it's got a little bit of you know, her particular talent and the fact that her dad was a basketball player. And we did her shirt was all embellished with the blue and silver clear sequins with her name and the number, her dad's number, and the whole 9 yards. So that was, I've done several shoes for Miss Kentucky's, some riding boots, cowboy boots, high heel shoes with 3-dimensional roses, and pretty much anything the girls want.
Well, they're great, and they're fun too.
Yeah, they're fun.
They're really fun.